Today I got a second clip here from the Breakfast Club that I wanted to upload the other day, but I ran into some issues and I couldn't upload it at the same time. But the arguments, they started talking about January 6th, and I think definitely January 6th, for anyone that sees themselves as a Republican, it is a very difficult position to be in to defend because the right is supposed to stand for a law and order. And I think definitely Trump made many failures on January 6th, but I don't want to get into a topic. I want to jump into the second point where they're talking about qualified immunity. In qualified immunity, I was mostly against it. I am still kind of like 60-40 because I have friends of mine who are police and they give me a different insight about the actual law and how it actually works. And I think it's that law is actually very misunderstood. The same as stand your ground in other states. That people think it gives you the right to do certain things that it doesn't. And funny enough, Byron gives a good smackdown on the conversation as they're trying to argue about qualified immunity. And Charlemagne does a Google search at the moment while they have the interview, and he pretty much just shuts her down really, really good. Let me show you the clip.
When they could have been at the Capitol. That's the history of January 6th. So your question is, well, did he incite a riot? Well, I never seen somebody incite a riot.
Angela, I don't
want to cut you off. I'm gonna make one point. I don't want to cut you off.
No, but I want to make sure that you're addressing the right point because I actually did not use that language. What I asked you was, should Donald Trump be held accountable for his role in January 6th? And so what I think is important is to compare this to Steve Scalise being shot after someone wanted health care versus the rhetoric, the very dangerous rhetoric that Donald Trump spouted on January 6th, where more than 1,200 people have been charged in nearly all 50 states for their role, and 140 police officers were assaulted. The same police officers that your party has said they want qualified immunity for, and Donald Trump, because we're looking at the totality of the person, has said they should have full immunity, right? And when you think about the number of police officers who would get full immunity for their role in killing and being violent with people in our community like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, Charlene Lyles, Manny Ellis, is that really the kind of rhetoric that you want to push, especially at the Breakfast Club?
Well, hold on a second, Angela, because you brought in like 4 different topics now. Do you want to talk
about
Trump?
No, I didn't. What I brought in was January 6th responsibility, police accountability, and I used examples of why they should be held accountable. But you talked about how fantastic he was with the crime bill, which I object, but I'll let you finish your point.
Fair.
You also have not acknowledged the fact that this man was vehemently opposed to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And you all are supposed to be the party that protects law enforcement, where over 150 police officers were assaulted that day on January 6th. Because of Donald Trump's rhetoric.
So let me respond to a couple things. Number one, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There were actually 2 bills that were moving through the United States Senate that year. There was the George Floyd Policing Act that you discussed, and there was the bill that was written by Senator Tim Scott. They were both moving. Moving through the Senate, right? The Tim Scott bill is the one that could have got signed into law. It was essentially a mirror image of the George Floyd bill, except for qualified immunity. The difference between those 2 bills, and Angela, you just acknowledged it, the only difference between those 2 bills was qualified immunity. The issue with qualified immunity is very simple. If you remove qualified immunity from policing, you're going to have less officers on the street. Police officers make what? $70, $80, $90,000 a year. They have, most law enforcement has about 40 million or more encounters every single year with citizens. If you remove qualified immunity, I'm telling you this right now because I've talked with law enforcement officers all across the country, not the chiefs, the officers. They will not be working these communities. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm from Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I may not have always loved having the police in my neighborhood, and that's just a thing from a kid. I may not have always loved it, but when I needed them, they were there. And a lot of our officers today, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're white. So removing qualified immunity only lowers the number of officers in communities. What we're seeing right now is a movement of policing from states where they're not really respecting law enforcement to states where they do, or there's not that moral support for law enforcement.
I divided the clip in two sections, but in this part, he definitely does make a solid point about the morale. And people don't think about the morale when it comes to policing based on the encounters that you have had. I think we probably all have that one police that we still remember. I personally can tell I still remember Police Officer Torres when I was 18 years old. Total douche. But people have to understand that they're also humans, and if their morale is low for their position, what's going to happen? The good people, the people that have other opportunities, are going to leave, and the police still has a certain amount of police officers that need in a certain area. And if the good people are leaving, what are you gonna have left? You're gonna have a lower quality of police, and that's not going to be a good recipe for anyone, because the interactions are going to be worse, because the quality of the available potential officers is worse. I think it's similar to what happens in politics. It's hard to find someone that's going to be good, run for president, that's going to be a good person, or a person that they don't have something hidden, because they know at any opportunity they have, they're going to trash your entire life. And who wants that? It is the same thing. On certain cities, people are like, what am I doing here? And don't put together the bad officers with the good one. There's definitely horrible officers that should be fired, and there's definitely really good ones, and we need to have the right conditions for those people. The same as we all want it in our jobs. Whenever we are in our jobs, we want good conditions. That way we feel that they care about us in those positions. So I'm going to show you here the second part, where he actually does get the smackdown.
I was in my district yesterday. I was talking with an officer who's from Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia officer. He now is a Fort Myers officer. I asked him, I was like, well, why'd you make the move? He goes, because up there was no support for me as an officer for what I love to do, which is serve my community. So I said, enough is enough. I'm gonna move. He went to Florida. My sheriff in Florida, he's like, I have more applications coming from officers who are in states or in localities where they're not getting the moral support or whatever they need to continue to do their job day in, day out. And so they're leaving. Well, who does that hurt? That hurts. Who does that really hurt, though, Charlamagne? Yeah, because if you don't have officers if you don't have officers on the streets, or officers, in urban areas, who's really left in that lurch?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what does qualified immunity have to do with having less police officers?
Because the economic incentive of qualified immunity means that your personal assets aren't gone after if something goes wrong. So, you're in business. Do you get involved in a project or a deal that leaves you massively exposed financially? You may, depending on your passion for that project, but then you also sit back and think, now, wait a minute, if something goes wrong, I'm going to be held massively liable. Maybe I need to do something.
When something goes wrong, we're talking about people getting violently hurt or killed. Yeah, clearly. And I named people that you brushed over.
But it's clear when somebody clearly violates a constitutional right.
And when you violate a constitutional right, qualified immunity doesn't apply to you. And that's what I'm talking about. It does not. And Angela, don't do that. It does not.
I thought that was the definition. I thought that was the definition.
No, it does not.
I thought that was the definition.
No, it does not. If you carry yourself outside of the confines of your training and the protocols of that department, qualified immunity doesn't apply to you. It does not.
That's not true.
That is very true. That is very true.
That is patently false.
It's patently true, and we need to make sure we have that accurate. We cannot make that statement because you have a lot of officers out here who do their job with honor and dignity and respect for the people that they serve.
Listen, qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that protects government officials from civil lawsuits when they perform their jobs unless they clearly violate a constitutional right.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And what is a violation of that right is when they're outside the norms of their training and the protocols of that department or that agency.
Oh boy, the smackdown. I mean, there's nothing else to say. And before this debate, I was probably more against qualified immunity. Well, not only before this interview. Before, like maybe a few years ago, I was more against qualified immunity until I actually got into the details and asked more qualified people questions from the officers, from friends of mine who are lawyers who practice criminal law, and they told me it's not how media or the people want to project it. And he was 100% correct. All businesses have LLC. What is an LLC? Limited liability company. That's pretty much how anyone that has a certain amount of investments. That's why big organizations, they have trust, and they have different ways to protect their assets. And when you do a dangerous job, like some police officers do, depending on the area, if you're in a police in a good area, you probably have a really, very chill job. But if you live in a rough area, oh boy, that's definitely gonna be tough. Personally, I wouldn't want to do that job. I mean, I'm fine doing the stuff that I do, and I definitely enjoy it. I don't want to be out there trying to figure out what's going to happen and figure some stuff out. My stepdad used to be a police officer. Definitely not a fun situation to be growing up, but I will leave it as that. I think Byron Donald's proved his point that he's more knowledgeable than the other person, and I think the Breakfast Club should get a rename and put the Democrat Breakfast Club. I mean, pretty much every time they bring a Republican in there, it clearly shows their colors. Like, they don't have a reasonable conversation. You can see it's completely always a dogfight trying to prove the other side. And when they get a Democrat, it's all easy, it's all chill. I was like, hey, look, be consistent. At least be consistent. If you're a Democrat and you give pushback to both sides, I will have more respect for you. But when you're kind of like playing around and chilling with the other person, and then when the other person from the other party comes around, I mean, come on. I'll leave it at that. I'll keep it short.